Here we go, thank you. When I rehearsed this, I was planning on saying that, so I guess I won't. I'm Joshua Cannon. I guess I will. And I'm a build engineer in a buildless lang. And I want to talk to you guys about build engineering, especially because we're in Python and there is no build. So what the heck do I do all day? So this presentation's in two parts. The first part is I'm going to answer these three questions. Who am I? What is build engineering? And DevX, which is short for developer experience. It just doesn't fit on the slide. And why do I care? Why do you care? Ooh, maybe even how we get a manager to care. So that part is pretty static. The only missing piece of information there, I work at IBM in the Watson Orders division. So what is build engineering, especially in a buildless lang? Well, it's the tools and processes for the people that are building the code. It's not about how to build the code mechanically. It's about how you all and myself sit down and build code. So that's basically the answer. A build engineer is responsible for these tools and processes that the developers are using to build code. And if we're responsible for that, that means we get to control to some degree and are responsible for the developer experience. I really liked Brandon's talk this morning on crossing and walking the line, because we all want to be on the green side when we want to be on the green side. And yes, sometimes we want to nudge ourselves into the red side. And that's exactly why someone cares about build engineering and developer experience, because that's where we want to be when we want to be there. The important thing I think of when I think of Brandon's talk, sometimes you get pushed to the red side. It's not about you purposefully walking your toe over. Some things and some people push you. And that's what we don't want. That's a bad developer experience. So if those are the answers to my three questions, it's not a whole lot of color in there, not a whole lot of depth. So I'm going to answer them with a story. It's my story getting into and being a build engineer. So it starts at my last company. It was my first job out of college. I was a bright and bushy-tailed engineer. And I remember early on, I got a PR. I posted a PR, sorry. And I got a review from a principal software engineer. So this is somebody who's important. Their opinion matters. Their time is very valuable. And so I'm ready. What secrets of the universe do they have for me? And I open it up, and it's long. Ooh, it's long. And I got eviscerated by this person. They left stylistic comments. That's all it was. Here's where we put parentheses. Here's where the comma goes. Here's how we do this and that. How many of you have gotten a review like that? That's less than I expected, but more than should be there. You've written that review. What should we have done instead? What should have been in process instead of this principal software engineer making me just like go, oh God. We should have used tools. We should have used black. What's not seen here is it was a C++ build system, but whatever. Now the company did have a sophisticated build system. It stopped at being able to build the software itself, and it didn't extend into how people built the software. I like this picture because it reminds me of coding on a typewriter. Typewriters are extremely well-designed and sophisticated machines. They're great at what they do. We don't code on them. We have better tools. We have IDEs. We have keyboards. We have red squiggly lines, right? And so a lot of ways, it felt like coding on a typewriter. So one of the things I forgot to mention earlier is that I'm a build engineer, but one of the things I want to stress is that build engineering can come from anyone. We have volunteer fire departments. And so I got a manager throughout my career at that company that understood that build engineering could come from anyone and gave me the space to do build engineering while still on an applications team. And so my focus was on improving the developer experience of the people writing Python at that company. I got to do a lot of things that I think really helped those engineers become more productive and happier. Stay on the green side. The first thing is we moved all of our code into a monorepo. If you don't know what those are, you just stick all your code in one repository. It's in the name. And there's a long list of pros and cons, and you can go look online. I don't think I have an original thought as to pros and cons on a monorepo. I would say, though, for the pros, you get really good collaboration across your teams and your code, because you're all in one room and you're talking together. Another pro I'd say is that you can make really good atomic refactors and commits across your entire code base. You don't have to wait and see who you broke when you broke things. You simply do it. You broke everyone. You also get to fix it. It's great. Responsibility. The one big con you'll hear is that monorepos require sophisticated tools. You can't have that much code in one repository without having something keep you from just running your tools ad nauseum. Now, luckily, I'm a build engineer. I care a lot about tools, and we'll talk about how that con gets mitigated later. Other things I did, I switched from make to poetry. I don't know how many of us love using GNU Make with isolated C++ build systems overlaid to do Python things. And poetry is just so natural and easy to use. I also switched from using no formatter to using black. And I want to call out black here. I love black for 2 reasons. The first reason is that it's opinionated, which means we don't get to bike shed on style. I said that correctly. We don't get to bike shed on style. We can bike shed on other things. How much do we love bike shedding? And bonus points, black's style is to minimize diffs. And that's something I love. Taking these stumbling blocks, these points at which you're pushed over into the red, and removing them so that you can focus on reading the code semantically instead of stylistically. So that was the first thing I love about black. The second is that it's kind of become the de facto community standard. I mean, it's the only answer I hear that got shouted out, which, by the way, love shouting out. Keep doing that. That means that my team's code looks like your team's code, looks like open source code. And again, I don't have to think about how to read Python. I can do it semantically now. So in the spirit of tooling, we also started using Flake 8 to find these issues earlier so that the humans don't have to find them. We started using MyPy because static type hints are now another way of finding issues, as we heard earlier today. And PyTest, so we can write tests. It's not enough, though, in my opinion, to bring these changes to people and just say, here they are, congratulations, you're having a better experience. Because another theme of this talk is that people build the code. You need to address the people. So started giving presentations internally. Why are we changing things? What are we changing? How are we changing them? Started opening different discussion forums where people could talk about things. We actually opened I started a working group so that it wasn't my opinion overlaid on everybody's code. It was a collective. We had representatives from everywhere in the company. And so in a lot of ways, we got to really boost this experience of the developers from using almost no tools to using many so that they can focus on doing what they want to do, writing code, and not worrying about issues or style or things like that. Now, this is me as a build engineer, and I said it was my last company. It wasn't enough. I love build engineering. And so I wanted to be a build engineer, and I wanted to be a build engineer at a company that cared about build engineering. So I started looking for new jobs. I got to be a build engineer. It was on the title slide. So what did I do at this company? Why did they need a build engineer so badly? They hired one. And what changes did I make to go from bad to good? Well, let's talk about bad. What experience were they having as developers at this new Python monorepo shop that's doing AI/ML? So the developer experience was better. They were using tools. They had a build system. It was Bazel. I don't know if you've heard of it. We'll talk a little bit about it in a bit. They were already using a formatter, which was Yapif, so that's great. They had some in-house AST parsing to do linting, which I make this face because I don't like things that are in-house. They were using MyPy, which was great. And they were running their tests with unit tests, so they had tests. Yay. So I talked about the build system, Bazel. It really held them back. So it's a very powerful and sophisticated build system. It's amazing for a lot of use cases. It just wasn't one for theirs. It turns out a lot of their tests were flaky. People would come to the support channel and say, Josh, why is this test failing on CI? I haven't touched it. And I would go, yeah, I don't know. Let's just rerun it. See what happens. There was really odd scenarios where people would go, Josh, every time I fast forward master, I go to run a command, and then it takes 4 minutes. What's going on? And that fails what I call the coffee test. I'm OK with interruptions. I don't get pushed over into the red if I can go grab a cup of coffee and come back. I can't do that. 4 minutes, I'd grab the coffee, I'd sit down, and I would just stare at it and drink it and feel my adrenaline rushing and get upset. Additionally, if you fast forwarded master too much and you went to go run your tests, you'd be running this suite of tests. It could take anywhere from 1 minute to 30. So what happened was people would hold off pulling master and merging it into their branches till the end of the day. So what do you change? How do you take something like a bad developer experience and how do you make it better? One big change, of course, is kind of the glue code. It's the build system. It's the thing that puts all this together. Let's set that aside, because it is one big easy win, but it's not the only one. How you change things, I like to call, and I've heard it called before, a lift by 1,000 breezes. It's kind of the opposite of death by 1,000 paper cuts. If you could kill someone with 1,000 paper cuts, surely you could also lift them up by doing a bunch of little things. And that's exactly what we did. I talked about my love for black, so we switched from YAPF to black. It also helps that black is faster. We switched from in-house AST linting to Flake 8 and plugins, because it turns out Flake 8 does that. It already operates on the AST. There's already plugins for what we wanted to do, and I got to throw it over the fence. And I love throwing things over the fence because it means somebody else does the performance improvements and the bug fixes, and they add new features for me. Right? That's one of the things we love about open source. We started leveraging PyTest. I said there were unit tests. They were using unit test. But we switched to PyTest. Why? Like Brandon said, we don't love writing tests. Maybe one or two of you are masochists, and you do. We don't love it. Anything you can do to reduce that burden is a benefit. And PyTest has really great plugins, and the way they encourage you to style your code, it helps reduce some of the burden. It's still not something you love doing, but at least it's easier. And it doesn't stop at Python either. How many of us deploy our applications in a Docker image? Ooh, OK. That's more than I thought, honestly, which is a good thing. It should be easy to build those Docker images. People should have to know how to build Docker images to get one made, and it should be performant. Things like these reduce the cognitive burden of the developers so they can focus on what they want to do. So then I talked about build systems. So there was Bazel, and I switched us to Pants, which I'm wearing a fun shirt that's been sponsored for me by. What are they, and how do they work? So both are build systems. They're both open source. They have their own sort of communities and strengths and weaknesses. It just happened that Bazel wasn't the right one for us as a Python monorepo. It didn't do Python well. It's gotten better since we started the journey. But Pants just naturally fit. I have a whole slide on Pants. Yes, that was a pun, and it was intended. And it was really cool because actually one of the things I got to do in switching to Pants was I got to become a contributor. It's a title you get to wear. I was very proud to wear it. Because I was upstreaming changes and doing bug fixes, I eventually realized I cared so much about build engineering, I became a maintainer, which is how I get an awesome t-shirt and get to stand on a stage and talk about build engineering. And that's because the community was so welcoming and easy to talk to. Because again, part of software engineering is social. It's the people writing the code. We should make these communities better. And I'm happy to be a Pants maintainer for two reasons. Apparently I like twos. The first one, I get to infect other people's experience. And infect actually has a negative connotation. Maybe we choose a better word. I get to improve other people's build experiences that aren't at just my company. That makes me feel good. But the other, when it comes time to make changes to Pants, I get to argue for my engineers. I'm a maintainer. I get the status, and I get to represent them at these discussions. So that's your lift by 1,000 breezes. So how far did we get lifted? What were the fruits of my labor there? Well, the first one, we minimized a lot of seams. Our CI time went from 18 minutes. You post your PR. 18 minutes later, you get your first bit of feedback. We're now down to under 5. And I'm targeting this year to get it under 2. Imagine that. You post your PR, and within 2 minutes, we've run tons of tools. We've done static analysis. We've done style. We've done security checks. We've run our entire suite of tests. You finally get that feedback. And it only takes a little bit longer than it takes for Josh to go get a cup of coffee. It makes it easy for people to contribute to our code base. You shouldn't have to be an expert on how do we contribute code. It should be easy and natural and intuitive. As far as tooling goes, you'll see I have a slide here. I'm going to show you my toolbox. I have a plethora of tools. I love tools because they take the emotion out of being told your code's wrong. It's that review I got about style, but now it's a computer doing it, which has much less emotions. I won't say it has none because red squiggles. But more tools are great. And they're faster, and like Brandon said, we pay the machines to do things. We should probably leverage that. But again, it's not just about these improvements made mechanically to the experience. You have to reach the people. Slack channels, let people come. They're going to complain. Let's hear their complaints. Let's let them talk about what they've learned from their mouths. Again, presentations, that's how some people consume information. So making bi-weekly presentations on what's changing, how we're changing it, and why are things that we did to improve the experience of the engineers. When I was making these slides, I reflected on what the themes of build engineering were. And so I came up with 3. The first is responsibility and ownership. It turns out as people, when you own something, when you're responsible for it, you tend to care about it more. I think that's pretty universal. And that includes the tools and the processes and the environments and the workflows and all of the not code writing that goes into software development. But you'll also hear occasionally on stage, I'll talk about my engineers. Because that's my title. I'm a build engineer. I'm responsible for them. I'm responsible for their experience, and I like that. So the second thing, you've heard me talk about tooling and automation. You'll hear me talk about it more. It's so important because it reduces the human factor that comes into being told your code's wrong. And part of that is curiosity. I don't expect any of my engineers who do their AI ML stuff, who write their production code, to be thinking, what if there was a better formatter out there? That just doesn't need to enter their brain. And so as build engineers go, having a curiosity for what all's out there. What is the community doing? I never would have switched to black if I didn't know somebody else was using it. And the last one is the most important in my opinion, and that's be empathetic. This is something we could all do. This isn't a build engineering takeaway, but it's certainly something that's extremely important for build engineering. I think about 2 ways you could be more empathetic. Not everybody has the bandwidth to complain. At my last company, nobody complained we should be using a formatter. Surely I wasn't the only person to have this original idea, right? Maybe they just didn't have the emotional bandwidth to do so. The second one is dealing with what I've heard called the curse of knowledge. As somebody up here who loves and breathes build engineering and tools and automation, all I think about is build engineering and tools and automation. These things come naturally to me. When somebody posts in a support channel, hey, I ran this command and I got this error. My very first thought is a human one. Oh, come on. Why did you use that flag? Why didn't you use the other flag? But that's not an empathetic way to answer. That's because I have the curse of knowledge. I already knew what the answer was, and it's hard for me to realize that I knew that. You have to take a step back and remember what it's like to be someone else before you knew what you knew. So, oh, and then I have more. Yeah, communication's important, and that's what I talked about with the Slack thing. And then helping others. I just forgot to click the button. So the 3 questions I wanted to answer hopefully now are summarized better with a lot of depth and color. I'm Joshua Cannon. I'm a build engineer at IBM Watson Orders. Build engineering can come from anyone, and it's about caring enough about the developers to give them a great experience. Because the difference between a good and a bad one is staying on the green side of the line, being happy and productive, delivering value to your stakeholders. And at best, maybe being unproductive if it's bad, or at worst, trying to find a new job. So I've talked a lot about how I care about build engineering and how I love helping others have a better experience. So I get to use the remaining time in my talk to talk about my toolbox. And I like this picture because I've labeled all the numbers. So I wanted to show you my toolbox, and I'll leave this up, for 2 reasons. One, I want to show you the tools I use because I think they do deliver a great experience to my engineers. And I don't think that you have to be a build engineer in order to drive these values. You can just copy mine. I'll give reasons why I have certain tools in my toolbox. Take them or leave them. Doesn't cost me anything. So I'm going to go here. We'll have 3 columns. And I'm going to go from the tools that take the most work, but they still deliver a lot of value, all the way to the least work and deliver probably less value. So the first is testing. I've talked about PyTest. It makes testing easier. It doesn't make testing easy, but it certainly makes it easier. And I gobble plugins like Pac-Man. Other people have written these things. They obviously cared enough to write them and publish them. I'm going to see what they have to say and how they've delivered value. We'll use as many as are appropriate. And then code coverage, you've heard it talked about earlier. It's a great first way to make sure your code is being tested. It's not enough to write tests. It's to make sure that at least you're hitting the lines you think you're hitting. Cool. So the next thing is static analysis. If you don't want to spend all that time writing tests and running your code, the next best thing you can do is just look at it. And so MyPy, I've talked about community standards. MyPy is the de facto community standard for type checking. And it's gotten really powerful lately. You can find a lot of issues through just running this thing that checks your type hints. Excuse me. The second one on this list is Pylint. And I've put a sticker on this slide because there's a talk about Pylint and Pants tomorrow by Aurelian Unwave, that guy. So I run Pylint. It's slow. We'll hear about that later. But it still delivers a lot of value. And it definitely covers ground that MyPy doesn't. The third is Flake8. It's even faster, less powerful. But I like it because it's free. Of course, this slide won't be complete until I talk about Rough, because it seems to be taking off like gangbusters. And it eats some of Flake8 and Pylint. And I'm very excited to use it. And why am I excited to use it? It has a lot of fixing built in. And I like this column. I wish this column was infinitely long, because then there is no emotion. I don't get red squiggles. I don't get people complaining on my PRs. They never saw my bad code because something fixed it for me. So I will gobble these up even more like Pac-Man. Black fixes my style, as does isort. Less so, but we can argue. It still does fix some amount of style. And there is some cases where it's really nice to have your imports sorted. PyUpgrade, because I want my code to look modern. It should look and feel modern, because it is modern code. I'm using whatever the latest version of Python I can is. Autoflake removes dead code and imports, because those are at best distracting, and at worst they can be hazardous. Doc formatter. I want to format my doc strings again, so that mine look like yours, look like everyone else's. Preamble, technically a Python tool. This thing stamps copyright headers. I kid you not, at my last company, we would open issues on PR about copyright headers. You forgot to change the year. You forgot to add one. Come on. Let's use tools for this. And then I'm going to end it with Rough, because, whoo, doggy, I'm excited. And then we come to Pants. I've teased at it. It's a build system. I said it's open source. And I've also said I'm a maintainer, which is why I'm up here. To some degree. And it's the glue that runs all of these things. I can't run all of these tools in CI and expect my PR to take less than 5 minutes for feedback, especially considering that our tests, this column that I said takes the longest amount of time, we're on the order of hours for our monorepo to run all of our tests. And here's how I get away with that. It's Pants. It's a build system. It does so much, it doesn't fit on a slide. I wanted to put a demo up, but it just didn't happen. So I'll have to talk to you about it. And I very much encourage you to try it out with your own repositories. So the first one, it gives me a consistent and unified interface to run all these tools. And I like that because I've talked about eliminating seams. This first command, changed since main fix. It says only run my fixers in parallel on all of the code that's changed since the merge base of main, because why would I run them on code that I haven't touched? Already is a huge win for productivity. Now, Pants, and I'll talk about this a little bit on the next bullet point, it understands your files as dependencies. It understands this graph, this network of your code and how it relates to the rest of your code. And so you can do things like, and this isn't an actual Pants command, I had to shorten it for a slide, asking Pants to transitively check, which is MyPy, and test your code. What this says is, I only want you to run these operations on code that I've changed, or code that depends on what I've changed. Again, I'm ignoring an entire tree of the monorepo to only running the things I care about. The last one, Pants run path to myfile.py. It seems like an unexciting thing to put on a slide. What you don't see is virtual environments. What you don't see is code generators What you don't see is the fact that I have 300 dependencies in my lock file. I can't make a virtual environment and activate it and expect people to be OK with that. Pants sets everything up for me, cross language, and it just runs the file. It should be that easy. I should be able to just run the file. I talked a little bit about dependency graphs. It comes with inference, which is great. It statically parses your code to find those dependencies. And it does a really good job at it. When we were in Basel, we had 20,000 lines of hand-maintained dependency metadata. I don't know how I could fit like the comprehension of 20,000 lines of hand-maintained metadata on a slide. It would be hard. In Pants, we have maybe a couple hundred. And so it has this understanding of your dependencies, which is very powerful. It's incremental. I showed you how you can incrementally run commands on only files you've changed. It also incrementally resolves your dependencies. I talked about having 300 pip dependencies. It only installs what you need right when you ask for it. And so that means that developers that aren't using PyTorch, which is in the gigabytes, don't install it. There's extreme caching. It's the secret sauce to make my CI under 2 minutes. And it can do these things locally, and it can do these things remotely. The next to last thing is it's pluggable. This is Python. We love being able to write pluggable systems and monkey patching. And so I love that about Pants, because not only can I write code within this powerful framework that is only relevant to my organization. So OK, we'll do IBM Watson orders specific things here. But I can also experiment locally and upstream. And then everybody gets to reap the benefits. And it's cross-language. The only other language I would say probably matters a lot for this conference would be Docker. Being able to build and deploy Docker images easily while still having a really good cache behind it. So to conclude our journey through build engineering, build engineering has a multiplier effect. I don't know what kind of curve comes out of investment in build engineering, but certainly some investment in build engineering, and again, this doesn't have to come from a build engineer, nets you a positive outcome. Happier developers, more productive developers, and we can think about when you sit down, don't you want to be on the green side of the line when you want to? And on the flip side, not investing, at best, you get ambivalence, you get neutrality, and at worst, you get people leaving your company. You get bugs, security issues. I mean, you name it. Having a bad developer experience just leads to bad development. You have to invest in tools and automation. Because, again, it reduces the people part, which just carries so much emotion of software development. It's so cheap. Minimize seams. We don't want to be pushed into the red. We want to be able to walk that line ourselves. And so minimizing seams makes it so easy to stay on the green side and make workflows cohesive. Last and most importantly, I'll say it again, have empathy. This is something we could all do. In fact, none of these are build engineering specific conclusions, especially not have empathy. But it's so important. We don't acknowledge enough that software development is a social activity, and we should. Because if we were just writing code to write code and it does the thing, we'd all be writing assembly. But we write Python. It's a readable language. It's readable for the humans, and we need to acknowledge that. And on the human note, here's how to contact me. I'm on the Pants Slack as the J Cannon. I'm on Discord. It's at the bottom of the footers. And that's my email address, which I'm very brave and I'm putting up here. This is also checked into Git, so I'm sure I'll get something funky. And yeah, I really do reach out. You can tell I love these things, and I'd love to talk to you about any and everything on the slide or other things. So I got time for questions. Yes. Do remember that every question holds us from lunch. Yes.
I wish I could just clone you and bring you to my job.
Well, I showed you my toolbox. That's like half of it.
So my question is, being in QA and software automation and dealing with the complex and field environment and different developers and projects,
Yeah, so the question was, how do you reach different teams of people and how do you get them to buy in? Is that, okay. I think, yeah, it is the people aspect. You got to meet with those people, see what they care about, see what's bothering them. A lot of times I was fixing things I didn't think were important, but it turns out were, because I asked the people, what could we do better? What pains you? And so it really is meeting them halfway. The other thing I'll say is demonstrations go a long way. I myself am very hands-on and visual, so sometimes you just do the thing and show them, and they go, oh yeah, that is better. But really, I would say it is a case-to-case basis. Good question. I'll take more until I get kicked off, which might be now.
It's their lunch.
It's your lunch. One over there.
Okay, so with regards to fixers as mentioned, do you put that in your pre-commit book, or when do you run fixers?
Yeah, when do you run fixers is a good question. I personally think they're slower than can go in a pre-commit hook, and somebody out there can lob a tomato at me. I don't tend to. I say you could, and that's great. CI checks that they're fixed, so if you didn't do it, that's fine. And we have, I like bots. I didn't get a whole slide on bots, but again, interacting with machines. I have a bot, so if CI complains about it, you just tell the bot to go fix your code and it pushes to your branch. So if you're not running it locally, because I don't, because I'm lazy, just make the computers do it if they're wrong at all, if your code's wrong at all. Yeah. Find me in the hallway chat.